It begins with a wall of darkness. In the spring of 1935, noon skies turned to night across the Great Plains. People reached for doorways they could no longer see. Cattle stumbled into fences, and the air seemed to scrape the lungs. This was no ordinary storm. It was dust, topsoil lifted into the sky and carried for hundreds of miles. And it wasn't just nature's work. It was ours. Tonight, we're telling the story of the Dust Bowl. How a farming boom, a brutal drought, and a fragile ecosystem collided to create one of the worst environmental disasters in American history, and the lessons that still matter today. For centuries, the Great Plains were a sea of grass. Prairie roots ran deep, knitting the soil and holding moisture through wind and drought. Bison roamed. Fires swept across the land and renewed it. This was an ecosystem built for extremes. Then came the promise. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, federal policies and a powerful American myth drew settlers west. The Homestead Act offered land. Railroads sold visions of endless wheat. And an idea took hold: rain follows the plow. The belief that cultivation would change the climate. For a time, the weather seemed to agree. Rain fell. Grass gave way to wheat. World War I brought soaring demand and prices. Tractors replaced teams of horses. One man with a machine could plow more acres than an entire family once could. Across Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, and New Mexico, millions of acres of native prairie were turned under. The deep roots that had anchored the soil for millennia were cut. In good years, it looked like progress, but it carried a hidden cost. When the 1930s arrived, the rains faltered. Year after year, the plains dried. Crops failed. Heat built. And when the winds rose, as they always had, they found something new to carry: bare, exposed soil. The first dust storms were strange and frightening. Then they became common. People named them dusters, black rollers, black blizzards. On April 14, 1935, Black Sunday, one of the worst storms in memory, turned daylight to pitch black in minutes. Dust seeped through window frames, under doors, into cupboards, into lungs. Families hung wet sheets over windows and sealed cracks with rags and newspaper. They swept endlessly, and still the dust returned. The toll was real. People developed dust pneumonia. Children wore masks to school. Livestock choked on dusty feed. Fences disappeared under drifts of soil. And all the while, prices for what little was harvested kept falling, pulled down by the Great Depression. It's tempting to see this as bad luck, an act of nature. But the Dust Bowl was shaped by human choices. Native grasses were removed faster than anyone understood. Wheat fields stretched beyond what the land could sustain. Absentee suitcase farmers plowed for quick profits and left. Straight plow lines ran downhill, inviting erosion. An ecology adapted to drought and wind was replaced by a system that could not cope. And yet, people tried to endure. They taped their windows, wet their brooms, and worried over their children's lungs. Families huddled together at noon in near darkness, listening to the wind roar like an oncoming train. The worst storms carried the plains eastward, grain by grain, dusting cities as far away as Chicago and Washington, D.C., even ships out in the Atlantic. For many, survival meant leaving. Hundreds of thousands packed what they could and headed west along roads like Route 66, hoping to find work in California's fields and orchards. They carried the memory of home with them, and the name others gave them: okies, a label that often stung, no matter where they came from. Some found jobs. Many found hardship. But they kept going, hoping for a better season, a better day. Back on the plains, help arrived, not as rain at first, but as new ideas. The New Deal brought scientists, foresters, and conservationists into the fight. In 1935, the federal government created the Soil Conservation Service, today the NRCS, to keep ground where it belonged. Contour plowing followed the curves of the land. Strip cropping broke fields into alternating bands that slowed the wind. Crop rotation and leaving fields fallow let the soil recover. Windbreaks, rows of trees, were planted to reduce wind speeds across open fields. Millions of seedlings went into the ground in the shelterbelt, a living wall across the plains. These weren't quick fixes. They were a new way of thinking: work with the land, not against it. Protect the soil because it underpins everything: food, livelihoods, communities. Farmers learned to read their fields differently. Government agents taught and listened. Slowly, the practices spread. Then at last the weather changed. In the late 1930s and into the 1940s, rains returned and harvests improved. It wasn't policy alone that ended the Dust Bowl. Climate shifted and the storms eased. What policy did was reduce the chance that the same mistakes would lead to the same catastrophe again. The Dust Bowl left scars in the land and in memory, but also a blueprint for better stewardship. What does this mean for us now? Start with the basics. Soil is not just dirt. It's a living system. It forms slowly and can be lost quickly. When we strip a landscape of its natural defenses and push it beyond its limits, we invite trouble, especially in a world where droughts and heat waves are intensifying in many places. Look at the modern Great Plains. It remains a breadbasket. Tractors are smarter, seeds are hardier, and satellite maps help farmers watch their fields in real time. But there are new pressures. Irrigation from the Ogallala Aquifer transformed agriculture, and in many regions that groundwater is declining. Dust storms haven't vanished. They flare in dry years. Conservation practices remain essential, not optional. The larger lesson reaches beyond the plains. Whether we're talking about forests, rivers, or farmland, resilience depends on keeping basic systems healthy. Soils that hold water, roots that anchor slopes, wetlands that absorb floods. When we forget that, the bill eventually comes due. The Dust Bowl is a reminder written in grit. There's also a human lesson. The photographs from those years, faces weathered by wind, hands cracked from work, a mother's eyes on the horizon, show more than suffering. They show endurance and adaptation. Communities figured out how to share water, to pull together when the air itself seemed to bite. Policy mattered. Science mattered. So did neighborliness. And finally this, the Dust Bowl wasn't inevitable, and neither is the next environmental crisis. We can choose how we use land. We can invest in conservation when times are good. We can listen to local knowledge and to experts, match crops to climate, and plan for the extremes that will surely come. The past doesn't hand us a script, but it does offer a warning and a set of tools. So when you see those black blizzards rolling toward farmsteads, don't just see disaster. See a turning point, when the United States began to treat soil as a common inheritance worth protecting. See the farmers who tried new methods, the workers who planted windbreaks by the mile, the families who kept going when the sun disappeared at noon. We created the Dust Bowl. We helped end it. And the choices we make now about land, water, and climate will decide whether we face the next storm unprepared or meet it with healthy soils, rooted landscapes, and communities ready to weather the wind.